Hello again and welcome to the Better Learning podcast. My name is Carl. As always, it's a real pleasure to have you here with me today. And we're going to be talking about accessibility to learning. As always, we're going to cover the knowledge you might need to improve accessibility to learning in your curriculum. So, here we go. So far on the podcast, we have discussed the background around the need for greater accessibility to learning in our first episode. Then we moved on to why you might want to invest in this change and why you might want to be a part of it and model the change that you would like to see in education. And finally today, I've been waiting for this one, we are going to look at some of the knowledge base that you might need in terms of what to implement and what you can then begin adapting and making appropriate for your learners in your learning space. The first means for accessibility I'd like to discuss is an amazing approach called Teach Me to Reach Me. It's very holistic, it's very humanistic, it's a very individualized approach to addressing needs. So admittedly, it's not appropriate perhaps for a class of 30, 35 that we may face on a daily basis. However, if we're looking to implement smaller changes to begin with, this could be perfect. And I've no doubt that immediately you've all got a student in mind as I discuss this. So let's go into some details. So there are 4 different areas of the Teach Me to Reach Me approach. The first is See Me, and that details that we should look beyond a student's profile. It can be quite easy at times for us to draw on what is perhaps in a computer file or been written someone else when a student is very much observable in front of us. You know, they're live, they're active in an environment rather than having been observed in quite an isolated environment and tested. So in this case, we're looking beyond the label. We're looking, again, it's very humanist. We're looking at the human being in front of us. What are their favourite things, their least favourite things? You know, how do they respond emotionally to the stimuli of our curriculum? These are some things to consider. The second area is Hear Me. So build a rapport with me. I appreciate sometimes this can be easier with some students rather than others, but this is also a part of it. Everyone communicates in a particular way. It's being open and receptive to someone else's means of communication and reciprocating that by listening. Next is Show Me, and Show Me is very much about creating a space in which the student can demonstrate their strengths and that they're not defined by their limitations. We can be quite dismissive at times, I feel, of what we could actually observe of a student in a classroom. We tend to defer perhaps to an EHCP or a pupil profile, when in actuality those are quite isolated. You know, you can make live observations and test responses, and you can create spaces for students to explore their strengths and weaknesses and demonstrate them to you, which is really important considering the holistic and humanistic angle of this approach. And last, but possibly most relatably, is Trust Me. When a student believes that you have put your trust in them, they will take risks with their learning, with their understanding. They will volunteer ideas, whether they're fully formed or otherwise, and in whatever exercise you're doing, they will take risks because you've created this safe and brave space for them to reach the outer fringes of Vygotsky's zones of proximal learning. And I'm sure we can all relate to needing someone, as teachers and as people that we can turn to and find solutions with. That's very much at the core of the trust me element of teach me to reach me. When you make mistakes as a learner and maybe even as a teacher, you've got that trust relationship to fall back on. And actually, to attest to the teach me to reach me approach, there have been numerous times with students, even before I was aware of this framework, that I could push. Not because I could push them to do more, not because perhaps they were investing in themselves at this point, but they were investing in the relationship. They trusted me to push them a bit further, perhaps be a little bit uncomfortable in their learning and do more, in all sorts of ways, be it attention span or their understanding or some kind of risk about their self-image, their self-esteem, or maybe trying a new genre of music, who knows. But it works, and it's very cool to witness. It's very value-based, actually. I find it imbues a lot of value into your work. So if perhaps that's a core value, like me, that you share, I would absolutely recommend trying this out. It is so cool to see it work. Now, secondly, we have something really clever. It's called dual coding. Now, this is definitely a less holistic approach. It's more geared towards your resources and your presentations. So what dual coding is, it's pairing two different stimuli together to improve cognition and recall. So typically, and I do only say typically, dual coding will feature a visual stimuli and a verbal stimuli. So one very common example of this is if you ever watch some kind of visual media on the internet or on television and you have subtitles on. So you've got the visual stimuli there, the content you're watching, as well as the closed captions, subtitles going on there. So you've got two different stimuli going on at the same time, and that improves your recall. But that said, it's not strictly visual and verbal. It could be anything depending on your discipline. So I would really encourage you actually to be a creative practitioner in this instance. And depending on your field and your specialty, your subject area, I would really experiment actually. What different stimuli can you incorporate that will add a different cognitive buy-in for your learners? Obviously, of course, you shouldn't just exclusively use this and expect your learners to sit and face the board, or you for the entirety of your lessons, lectures and sessions. It needs to be paired with something else, but for delivery this is fantastic, and it's subtle, and you don't have to really change an awful lot. You just need to add an extra element, perhaps visual or verbal, to your existing resources. So in that sense, there's not a lot of work that you have to do because you've already done it. You just need to add in this second element, this second stimuli. Now, on a different level, if perhaps you were looking to make some more drastic, fundamental, perhaps deeper changes to your curriculum, then I would really encourage you to check out something called project-based learning, or PBL. Now, with project-based learning, you will find yourself with the opportunity to step back from this notion of you have to stand at the front of the class and deliver learning, and students have to engage with it. With project-based learning, it's very much a co-constructive and social way of learning. And in considering the social element of project-based learning and its co-construction, there was a paper published in 2019 that highlighted the impact that it had on the retention of women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics subjects because of the social element and the social justice and the autonomy of the students. They were able to impact their own values onto the sort of social hierarchy and how they conducted the project, meaning that women found it an accessible, equitable learning experience whereby they were treated as equals. And I think that's fantastic. I think that's what we're going for here. So what project-based learning could look like in your classroom. Now I'm going to include a link to this video in the description below, so please check that out. This video was originally intended to demonstrate the use of and principles of universal design for learning. That's how I came across it. But essentially, the learners were given a level of autonomy, not in what they were learning, but how they were learning it. So in this video, in the middle of the classroom, because they were learning about hydroelectric dams and all the implications of that, in the middle of this classroom was a sandpit. And so there was a group of students stood around playing with sand, building dams, testing out hypotheses, and using water to prove and disprove their thoughts. There was a corner where there were students just reading from books and absorbing information that way. That was how they had chosen to access the learning that was giving to them. And then you had students that were on computers and doing their research that way. And that's kind of what project-based learning is. That's a really great way of exemplifying it. They've been given some autonomy, and in that sense, you'll notice if you watch the video, the teacher isn't teaching, they're not delivering, they've become kind of a consultant. They're, walking around the room and saying, hey, what have you found? And the students are explaining their learning. What they've tried, what they've learned, what's going wrong, what's going right. And it's such a cool thing to see. And I appreciate it's a huge undertaking in redesigning perhaps even your learning space if you wanted to go that far. Of course, you don't have to. This change is absolutely yours to own and take as far as you want. But how cool is that? That these students were so engaged on their own terms and able to reflect back what they were doing, what was going wrong, and then seek some input. It was a really fantastic video to watch. I would really, really recommend watching it. And with regards to the project-based learning paper that outlines the impact it had in the STEM class, and including making women feel included and feeling that field of engineering and such, it was accessible to them. I'll include that in the bottom as well, the link for that. And to finish off the podcast today, I'd like to share with you an experience that I've had in the past 2 weeks with a student I've been working with one-to-one as an LSA. Now this student has been not removed from mainstream education, but it's been deemed that it's inappropriate for him due to an ASD diagnosis and ADHD. And his way of learning is he likes projects. Now, as his LSA, I'm present with him right the way through, working with various tutors in maths and English and and all sorts, and he struggles to engage with it because he likes working with his hands and he really likes baking. In fact, in doing the research for this episode of the podcast, I have a shopping list written down that I've been using as a bookmark in his handwriting and my handwriting here and there, and with some corrected spelling, mostly him correcting my spelling. But yeah, he's been struggling to engage with these maths and English lessons because they haven't been project-based. He hasn't been able to use his hands in a constructive way that he can see the outcome. He can see and project the full journey that he's going to be on and the outcome of that. And so we did some baking because he loves baking. And, we wrote out the shopping list. He's telling me, he's using his verbal skills to really explain how to make this chocolate cake. That was my preference. And yeah, I'm drawing all this cool sort of reasoning out of him using direct questioning, which is a very cool technique. If you haven't read Jeff Petty and his explanation of direct questioning, I really encourage you to. But we're using that, and I'm drawing all sorts of cool reflections and, have you thought of this out of him. And then it comes to actually doing the baking, and suddenly we're doing maths, we're problem solving, it's basically chemistry that we're doing. That's essentially what cooking is, if I'm being really honest. And it was such a turnaround. Suddenly he was fully engaged. I wasn't having to, draw on our rapport, our relationship in order to, get him to tolerate learning. He was going from tolerating learning to fully engaging with learning, and it was just such a turnaround. Even his demeanour, his body language, his engagement, which, as we all know, for someone with ADHD can be tricky. It was wonderful. So yeah, that is the power of accessibility to learning and project-based learning, and basically forgetting everything you know and assessing the child in front of you, the whole teach me to reach me thing, which he has gotten so much out of. So on that note, with all of that in mind, I thank you for listening and taking the time to join me today on the Better Learning podcast. I'm really looking forward to seeing the changes that you can make for your learners and your curriculum, and I'd love to hear about it. Please comment below. Let me know what you're considering, what you've tried already. You may be better at this than me, and I wholly encourage you to join in with this discourse and improve accessibility to learning and outcomes for our learners. So thank you for joining me, and have a wonderful time experimenting with accessibility. Thank you.